Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at a select few GameCube games that you can play on the Nintendo Switch. These are all initially exclusive to the GameCube, although some may have come to other systems before they came out for the Switch. Since 2017, steadily but surely, Nintendo have been dipping into their history to bring old titles to the Switch. With Nintendo Switch Online, it started with NES games, before SNES, and then recent editions of N64, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy Advance libraries. Further to this, direct ports of older games have come from nearly every previous Nintendo generation. Third-party companies have ported plenty of collections of NES and SNES games up, and a ton of both first and third-party DS and 3DS ports have been made. Games have also come from the Wii, and maybe the most notable ports have come from the Wii U, which at the start of the Switch's lifecycle provided a ready stream of content that most people hadn't played before. So it's a bit surprising then that one of the systems with the least amount of ports is actually the GameCube, which has only had, by my counting, 21 ports. And that's even counting games that came in a bundle separately, Pikmin 1+2 for example. So there really haven't been too many ports to come from the purple box. So let's dive right in now and take a look at some of the previously exclusive GameCube games you can now play on the Nintendo Switch. In the late 80s and early 90s, Nintendo released Metroid and Super Metroid, and with them spawned a new genre of video game that would become known as the Metroidvania. The latter half of the portmanteau being lifted from Castlevania, which shared a lot of elements with the Metroid games. Fast forward to 2002, and with the release of the original Metroid Prime on the GameCube, which is by many considered to be one of the best games ever made. Metroid Prime was a first-person shooter that cleverly retained all of the elements that made the original two games Metroidvanias, and was essentially a first-person shooter action-adventure game, which admittedly is a bit of a mouthful. Visually, Metroid Prime was already far ahead of its time, with a dark and moody atmosphere, excellent art design, and smooth 60 FPS performance. But it had until recently been languishing on 6th and 7th generation hardware. That is, until the release of Metroid Prime Remastered. Metroid Prime Remastered on the Nintendo Switch retains the stellar gameplay of the original and provides a complete and utter visual overhaul, bringing it up to modern graphical standards and making it one of the best looking games on the Switch. Remastered, which to Nintendo and Retro Studios' credit should probably have been called Remake, has updated higher resolution texture models, a new baked lighting system, improved physics for water and fire, new animations, customizable controls, a remastered soundtrack, and improved sound quality with the option for surround sound. The ability to play Metroid Prime portably on the Switch, with dual analog controls and with modern graphics, makes this the definitive GameCube on the Switch.
Super Mario Sunshine!
Super Mario Sunshine is not available as a standalone game, but you can play it as part of the Super Mario All-Stars collection, which for some reason Nintendo decided to release in a limited format. Probably the most underrated 3D Mario game, Sunshine's unique mechanic, the Flood jetpack, as well as the charm of Isla Delfino, have earned it a bit of a cult status amongst Nintendo fans. Like Metroid Prime, the Switch port is probably the definitive way to play Super Mario Sunshine. It looks great on the OLED model, with vibrant colours which pop on the screen, and the increased resolution is a welcome addition, showcasing that Nintendo's art design usually ages well, and trumps the so-called realistic graphics of other titles from this time period. I mean, just look at this. One thing that hasn't aged well unfortunately about Sunshine is the controls. They felt janky in 2002, and they feel janky now, and whilst the addition of motion controls somewhat softens the blow, they don't make up for the essential design issues with how Mario moves and how awful the camera control can be sometimes. In terms of performance, it still runs at 30 FPS, which while doesn't hinder overall enjoyment, it could have benefited from a 60 FPS uplift, which you would assume the Switch is capable of. People who've played Sunshine before will probably find a nice nostalgia trip here, but those who haven't may find aspects that are beginning to show their age, despite an uplift in visual fidelity.
My name's Leon. I'm under the President's order to rescue you.
Let's face it, if this was a list of top 5 Resident Evil games on the Switch, I very much doubt Resident Evil 0 would be making the cut. But we've still got the much more robust RE1 remake and the original Resident Evil 4 on the Switch. All originally released on the GameCube, where they were for quite a while exclusive. You can now play all 3 of these games on multiple platforms, and with RE4 you can play on pretty much any system, and even in VR on the MetaQuest 3. I still need to try that at some point. The Switch ports of these 3 games are certainly serviceable, and playing them in handheld mode is very satisfying. I really don't think the novelty of the Switch ever wore off for me. That said, they aren't without their issues when it comes to performance and loading times. Let's start with Resident Evil 4, which runs at 1080p at an updated 60 FPS on Switch. There are the occasional dips in frame rate when there's a lot going on screen, but on the whole it maintains 60 FPS for most of the game. Unfortunately, the biggest issue I have with RE4 is the lack of gyro controls, which would have been a really unique selling point for this entry. These were what made the Wii version so good back in the day. RE1 Remake is probably my personal favourite of these three games. It has beautiful pre-rendered backgrounds, and I've always been more inclined to the fixed camera angle Resident Evil game, so this would probably be my pick of the bunch. However, Remake on Switch suffers from poor performance and long loading times, and when I say long, I mean long, to the point where the door animation isn't able to finish in time to load the next room, and so after the door is opened you're treated to a black screen whilst you wait. The game targets 30 FPS, but it doesn't always manage to hold this, sometimes dropping into the low 20s, and I'm sad to report that Resident Evil 0 fares even worse than Remake, with some 20-second loading times between doors and even worse performance. But maybe that doesn't matter too much, as 0 is not a great game anyway. Sorry 0 fan. Aside from all that, it's still great to have Resident Evil on the Switch. I love these games, and playing them portably is a novelty that still hasn't worn off for me. Star Wars Jedi Knight 2. This is not technically an exclusive, but it's one of my favourite games of all time, so I'm including it on this list, and there's nothing you can do about it. Once you get through the horrendous tutorial level in Jedi Outcast and the game really opens up, it's one of the best Star Wars games that you can play, with some excellent lightsaber combat. And this was especially true back in the day when it was released, as we didn't even have Force Unleashed or Jedi Fallen Order to compare it to. Combine it with the light and dark ability system, which allows you to pick Force Lightning, something the Jedi Fallen Order games haven't even done yet, and the addition of 2 separate endings based on whether you choose the light or the dark side, and this game is really one to play. Admittedly, those choices are quite superficial, but back in the day this was the best we had. Even Knights of the Old Republic hadn't seen a release yet. The Jedi Knight series is perhaps most notable, and remembered best for its addition to the expanded universe of one of the best Star Wars characters not to be by George Lucas. I'm talking, of course, about Kyle Katarn. A former Imperial officer turned rebel mercenary turned Jedi Knight. Katarn's character evolves throughout the Jedi Knight series, making him part Han Solo, part Luke Skywalker, and part Obi-Wan Kenobi. A gruff mercenary with a cynical sense of humour, he develops into a skilled Jedi Knight and later a wise Jedi Master who teaches Padawans with patience in the Jedi Academy. The Switch port of Jedi Outcast is not really notable for anything. It's a bit bare bones, but at least it's quite cheap. Despite a good heaping of jank, some really poor level design especially in the early game, and some terrible shooting mechanics which haven't aged that well, Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast is still one of my all-time favourite Star Wars games, and one that is heavy with nostalgia for me. Baiton Kitos 1 and 2. Now for Baiton Kitos, I hope I'm saying that right. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I think everyone will probably have a different pronunciation for this one. This one had 2 releases on the GameCube, both of which have been ported to Switch in the form of a 2-in-1. The sequel wasn't actually released in the UK back in the day, so this is the only way to own a physical PAL copy. Baiton Kitos is a card-based RPG developed by Monolith Soft, the makers of the Xenoblade games. These were a kind of cult classic for many years, and there's been a real push from the community to make sure that these remasters sell well in the hopes of encouraging a sequel. Unfortunately, while these are good games, the remasters aren't perfect, with multiple issues, including poor performance. If you watch side-by-side comparisons between the GameCube and Switch versions, I feel there's a noticeable drop in performance and smoothness in remaster. There's a lack of an English voice acting track, and this is going to be based on your personal preferences, but for me I do like listening to dubs, so this was a bit of a disappointment. 3D model visuals, I think this is another case of old visuals not holding up well when blown into HD resolutions on modern TVs. But having said all that, this is a Monolith Soft game, and it's obviously a good game, and there's going to be things it does well. Pre-rendered backgrounds in particular are beautiful. They manage to maintain a sort of painterly aesthetic, and there are lots of quality of life features added to this, including autosave and improved cleaner UI. Overall, not the best ports, and they probably could have had more done to them to revive these old classic games, but they're definitely still worth a play, especially if you like card-based RPG systems. And lastly, to round this list out, I have an honourable mention, and I'm maybe saving the best for last here. The reason this one doesn't make the main list is because it hasn't actually released yet, but it's slated to release sometime this year. I'm talking, of course, about Paper Mario The ThousandYear Door. We'll have to see how well Nintendo do with this port, but so far the trailers look a bit like a mixed bag to me. The visuals look great, the colours look amazing, the art looks great, but arguably they already did all that on the GameCube, and it looks like this game will run at 30 FPS instead of 60 FPS, which was on the original release. I'm guessing this is to do with the Switch having to run the updated textures, but this does seem a bit of a shame and a bit of a missed opportunity. I suppose it's not really necessary in an RPG like this anyway, and we'll have to wait and see how they do with this one, but I'm really looking forward to replaying it. So that's a short look at a select few GameCube games that you can play on the Switch. In the future I'll be posting a video talking about the possibility of GameCube games coming to Nintendo Switch Online, so you'll want to stay tuned for that one. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe, and make a comment down below. Thank you very much.